Hello, and welcome to, the Luigi Cadorna class. I don't know. I'm just making sure it's all refreshed and ready. So, for starters, we're doing this slightly differently than we normally do, in that we are facing this way. So, instead of you facing my bookshelves, which are currently empty, and instead of you being able to see what is the wall that will be behind me, I am using my railway desk level to hold the computer, and you can see out that way. The trouble is, I don't have a ring light set up, and whilst I have the light on up there, that doesn't really even things up. So I am going to look a bit Phantom of the Opera-ish. Ah well. Enjoy the view. That's normally what I'm looking at when I'm talking to all of you. Welcome to Luigi Cadorna class. Now, this is the second group of Condottieri I have looked at, and honestly, I like the Condottieri in some regards because they don't claim to be anything they're not. They are very fast, very, very fast light cruisers, and everything is built around speed. It's kind of like turning around to Ferrari and going, "We'd like you to build an armored car," and the Ferrari turning around and going, "Well, you've built you a car which can do 200 miles an hour." Cool. Does it have any armor? Speed? Now, usually when we start talking about these particular cruisers, various people come up with various ideas to mention French contre-torpilles and the very large destroyers the French were producing, and the Italians' own large destroyers. And yeah, there's part of that, but there's also the reality of the place they want to fight, and that is my chair. It does need WD-40. They want to fight in a space which is honestly designed to destroy ships at this period. They want to fight in an area where you are going to be constantly under air attack. Now, why does this matter? Well, speed becomes an advantage under those circumstances. Air warfare is something which is slowly being considered, but by 1930s, it's fairly accepted that that aviation is going to be part of any naval war from now on, and that's fine. So why do you build a fast ship? Because aircraft, whilst they might have the range, they don't necessarily have the loiter time. And so, if you want to use naval power for war, especially against the French, if you're fighting as the Italians in the Mediterranean, you might want to use your naval power to do dashing raids to try and draw the French naval power into range of your own aircraft. If you can do a dash raid, a high speed one with your cruisers, well, that's fairly sensible and fairly useful. Because if your ships are moving at high enough speed, the odds of the aircraft spotting them being able to loiter long enough and provide accurate information on where they're going to be becomes far more difficult to judge. The aircraft has to maintain pace with the group, it has to maintain contact. As we all know, cloud cover, various things can have an impact, especially pre-radar. We are talking about contact being maintained with the Mach 1 able. So, speed can have a value there. It can have a value in how you strategically maneuver your forces. Now, I've left this cruiser definition up here because, well, the Condottieri are interesting when it comes to putting them into the cruiser line. There's often a question I consider whether they are actually just really large destroyers more than cruisers. I would argue probably they are on the balance of things cruisers, but there is definitely something negotiable about it. And fast cruisers. But there is also something else rather interesting, especially about this class, because in many ways, the class we're going to discuss are evolutions. They're evolutions of the Gisano class. To such an extent that, frankly, many, many books don't actually consider them a separate class. They consider them almost Gisano Batch 2s, which personally I find a bit rude. Because Luigi Cadorna and Amanda Diaz are certainly an evolutionary difference from their previous class. You know, the Gisano class, they're lovely ships, but they have 20mm deck armor, 24mm belt, 23mm turrets, a 40mm tower. They have a range of 3,800 nautical miles at 18 knots. They have a top speed of 37 knots, 42 in trials. Those ships are as close to speedboat cruisers as you're going to get. And for an ultralight cruiser, that is fine. Again, this is okay. If we're talking about range and endurance for a cruiser, it's got to be fit within its keeping. If you're designing a fleet to fight in the Mediterranean, they're not going to have the same range requirements. So you're designing a fleet to fight in the Atlantic or fight in the Pacific. And even the fighting in the Pacific is going to lead to different range requirements depending on how you're operating there. If you're talking about your fleet operating trans Pacific, then it's going to have very long range endurance and capabilities. If you're going to operate coastal Pacific, i.e., you're going to go up the South China Sea, East China Sea route to Japan, from Singapore and from the Indian Ocean and round and up, then you probably won't need, you can probably afford to use your standard displacement tonnage for things other than necessarily massive amount of fuel tanks. And again, whilst the fuel doesn't count towards standard displacement, the tanks and the components and things which go around maintaining those tanks do count. You don't just have a tank of fuel and go, plumb up, just put in a tube, maybe a single tap, we got fuel going into the boiler. It's a lot more than that. There is a whole fuel management system built into these things to maintain pressure, maintain flow. Because you need a constant flow rate, you need a constant pressure, and you need to balance it across your tanks often. Because if, let's say, you drained all the tanks on the port side and didn't drain any on the starboard, you'd have an issue. You also want me first ship which had done that accidentally and then suddenly found itself going, why are we listing? Are we taking on water? No! We've only drained fuel on one side. We need to move some across. Oh. Popsicle. It gets fun. Now, the Gisano class are the predecessors, and then it comes to these, the Cadorna class. And this isn't actually Cadorna, this is her sister. What can I say? Armando Diaz has a better photo. And trying to find a decent photo of those two ships has been proved very interesting. But what's the difference in between them? Their deck's the same, their main belt's the same, their turrets, well, their turrets are 23mm, which is exactly the same. They even carry the same two airplanes with the same launcher. They look exactly the same. They have Parsons geared turbines, thank you, Britain. And they have Yarrow boilers, also thank you, Britain. And they produce 95,000 horsepower, exactly the same. Top speed, 37 knots. But the range is 2,930 nautical miles at 16 knots versus 3,800 nautical miles at 18 knots. That's not just a drop of 1,000 nautical miles, that's a drop of 2 knots off the cruising speed. That's a big difference in terms of fuel tanks and fuel management. Couple that with a length of 169.3 meters, which is exactly the same, a beam of 15.5 meters, and a draft which is 5.2 meters versus 5.3 meters. That's still not that much fuel difference. So where's the tonnage gone? Well, the Luigi Cadorna class, their standard displacement is 5,323 tons versus and 7,113 tons full loaded. The Gisianos, well, they'd been 6,570 tons standard and 6,954 tons fully loaded. They'd been on a very, very slim, fast diet. Either that, or someone's selling massive porkies as to their actual displacement. The facts and figures do make for interesting reading. The fact that these pride of the Italian Navy were going for Parsons and Yarrow as their combination of boilers and turbines shows really the limits of Italian industry at this point. You have the shipyards. Yes, we can build ships. Yes. Can we make the hearts that go in the ships? No. We don't have enough. We don't have the metallurgical and qualitative level of production that we need for producing ships that can operate at the high speeds which we require from our current strategic and tactical doctrine. Ouch. Who do we buy them from? Not the French. Americans or Brits? They go with the Brits. Complement 507. That's interesting as well, because the Gessiana class complement had been exactly the same. In fact, pretty much everything is exactly the same other than the range and the displacement. So either there's a lot of lying going on, or there's a lot of things which have been managed to be refined differently to produce this ship. I think we can all make our own judgment on that one, but I would say myself that fact-wise and figures-wise, they're very similar classes, but these are different classes. Honestly, I wouldn't want to go into battle in either of them, because despite some recent, well-founded points about various British 6-inch gunfire, it's kind of like destroyer crews and cruiser crews in World War II. It does depend on which ship you're dealing with, how accurate they are in terms of how much their accuracy is. But also you have to remember that both sides get a vote. Yes, you're trying to accurately engage your opponent and are maneuvering to give yourself the best shot while also avoiding being hit by them. And that's the same for both sides. And sometimes both sides are very good at the job. Luigi Cadorna herself, well, she has an interesting career. She's launched in September 1931 after having been laid down in September 1930 and commissioned in August 1933. So, well, going to have an impact on French design and construction, being able to be built so fast. She actually stays in service until 1951. Survives World War II. She took part in operations for the Spanish Civil War. She participated in the occupation of Albania in April 1939. And she took part in laying mines near the islands of Lampedusa um, when World War II broke out. She also took part in the Battle of Calabria, where she avoided a submarine torpedo attack, and took her sister, Armando Diaz, in tow when she had boiler problems. She was in reserve, though, for most of the beginning of the war, basically because they were worried about the armor, and they had limited crews and limited fuel, and frankly, they just thought no point risking things. However, re-entered service when supplying the army in North Africa became more important. She provided distant cover for convoys headed towards North Africa, and occasionally sorted the fleet to intercept British convoys to Malta. In 1941, she also served as a transport herself, taking fuel and ammunition to Libya on emergency runs. In 1942, she was transferred to Pola, where she took part as a training role, and had a refit in 1943 before she joined the 8th Cruiser Division in June. June 1943, she spent her time transporting troops to Albania, and then she was transferred to Taranto, where from there she made mine-laying sorties to lay defensive fields in Gulf of Taranto, alongside the Scipione Africano, which was another light cruiser. At the armistice in 1943, she was at Taranto and sailed to Malta on the next day to surrender together with the rest of the fleet. She remained there until transferred to Alexandria in later September that year, 14th September. After a brief stay, she then returns to Taranto in October, and for the remainder of the war, she was used as a transport ship for the Allies, and taking part in repatriation of Italian troops. She's one of the few ships to stay with the Italian Navy, and because of her injured condition, she was only used as a training ship until stricken in 1951. But she did serve well. She was built by CRDA in Trieste. Now, CRDA, and we're going to see if I can pronounce this, are known as the Cantieri Riuniti del Adriatico, which I probably just mangled up, but I tried. Basically, that's the United Shipbuilders of the Adriatic, and this is an organization founded in 1930. Shipyard today is owned by Fincantieri. Didn't go defunct itself to 1984, and it's an absolutely mammoth organization. When I say mammoth, these are some of the ships they built for them. There's a Fiume, which was a Zara class. There is of course, Luigi Cadorna, the Condottieri light cruiser. There is the Conte di Savola, Savola ocean liner, built in 1932. There are various other light cruisers, and there is Vittorio Veneto, that class of battleship. Two of them, Vittorio Veneto and Roma, are built there, and the very nice Donna Nati, which is a cargo ship, is built there. They are a massive yacht and are critical to what Italy manages to build up for World War II. This is one of those manufacturers and shipyards which really has a very prestigious history very quickly because of this size and investment out of the organizations which came together to form them. They were the United Shipbuilders of the Adriatic, and yeah. So one of the interesting things also about this pair of ships, they get built by really big builders. We're going to be talking about her sister in a second, and she gets built by what is still one of the, well, let's be honest, Fincantieri is still a pretty big name in shipbuilding and naval ships. The other yard that builds this class is even bigger. There aren't many of those names around in the world that are still. She is named for the Marshal of Italy, Luigi Cadorna. Now, Luigi is an interesting thing. For starters, this is where the Condottieri as a group of names starts to fizzle out to my mind, because they were military leaders, yes, but they were military leaders in a specific period. And suddenly you are naming them a class for a pair of generals from World War One. Soon became Marshal of Italy and Count. He was chief of the staff of the Italian army from 1914 to 1917. He developed a reputation for being disproportionately bitter and ruthless, as well as having led multiple and consecutive failed attacks. He's often considered one of the worst generals of World War One. And to be honest, when I saw that written in a couple of books, I was in there going, In fact, yeah, it's an interesting epitaph to give a general, and it's an even more interesting to name a light cruiser after him. A light cruiser that's going to depend on morale because it ain't got armor, so it's going to be damage control for survivability. Admittedly, he hadn't had a very good career. He is, of course, though, made Field Marshal by Benito Mussolini. So, perhaps there is something there with that. Again, one would expect dictators to surround themselves with generals who are going to give them status. But honestly, Luigi Cadorna, he is, to my mind, a fine peacetime administrator who should never have been let near the strategic command of running an actual army in wartime. And when I say fine peacetime administrator, I mean that he wouldn't have been like to muck up the entire army or to be okay. Armando Diaz, well, this is a very different vessel. Her career in World War II is rather cut short. She is sunk by HMS Upright. Yes, the Royal Navy had a U-class submarine called Upright. I'm going to pause for the people who have just learned this to laugh. Right. Now that's out of your system, yes, there was a submarine called HMS Upright. I'm fairly sure they meant it in terms of upright nature and upright honesty rather than in you stay upright. But it can go both ways, I suppose. Anyway, she's launched in April 1933, having been, commissioned in April 1933, after having been launched in July 1932 and laid down in July 1930. So she is not even 10. During the Spanish Civil War, She served in West Mediterranean and was based at Palma de Mallorca and Melilla. Prior to this, she had made a cruise to Australia and New Zealand to show off how capable the Italian Navy was. It's amazing. She basically arrived and made the case for the Australians buying the Amphion class all by herself. She was present at the Battle of Calibri, of course, also called the Battle of Punta Stillo. I forgot that earlier. In December that year, she came under direct orders of the Super Marina for special duties in connection with protection of traffic to Albania. However, later that month, she took part in a convoy to Tripoli in company with Giovanni del Blandineer, which was, of course, a Ghisiano class. It was during the course of that operation that she had the supreme unluckiness to run into HMS Upright off the island of Clarke in the early hours of the 25th of February. She sunk in 6 minutes as her magazine detonated quite quickly, and this led to the loss of 484 men. The wreck has been located, and the ship lies on her port side in less than 50 meters of water, with her bow blown off. Her aft turrets are still in place, but their guns are buried in the bottom, so they have swung round. She is built by Condottieri Naval di Muggiano, which will become the Society per la Causa de Navi, Macchine et Artillerie, Ordone, Turner, Orlando, Otto, which in modern times tends to be referred to as Otto Malaria. Which are, of course, the makers of so many critical guns and are so critical to modern weapons development and are probably one of the biggest names in Italian defense exports to this day. So this is the thing. This class are built by really good shipyards. Shipyards which are still, their legacies are going to this day. Which is something to think about when we consider comparing them to German ships and some of the French ships, etc. They are yards which had been going before them. They're yards which will continue going after them. They're yards which have a tradition of building high quality. So yes, they might not be the most well-armored ships in the world, but they're not going to be built badly. They're going to be built to a standard. And their quality. Now, she is, of course, named rather oppositely from her sister, because she's named for Armando, who is probably one of the better generals in World War One. He was chief of staff of the Regia. He managed to stop the Austro-Hungarian advance along the Piave River in the First Battle of Monte Grappa. And it was in June 1918 that he led the Italian forces to the victory at the Second Battle of Piave River. He also achieved a decisive victory of Vittorio Veneto, for which a battleship will be named. This ends the war on the Italian front. Very, very different personality. In November 1921, Diaz was in Kansas City to attend the groundbreaking ceremony for the Liberty Memorial, which was being constructed there. He was there alongside Lieutenant General Baron Jacques of Belgium, Admiral David Beatty of Great Britain, Marshal Ferdinand Foch of France, and General John J. Pershing of the United States. U.S. Vice President Calvin Coolidge spoke. And it's in 1935 that reliefs of Jacques, Foch, Diaz, and Pershing all by the sculptor Walker Hancock, were added to the memorial. Also, during his visit to the States in 1921, Diaz toured New Orleans, where he planted a ceremonial live oak tree in Audubon Park, and is honored by the city with a street named after him. It's located in Lakeview, New Orleans to this day, I think. After World War I, he was appointed a senator, and then he was ennobled by King Victor Emmanuel III and given the victory title of the first Duca della Vittoria, the Duke of Victory. Mussolini named him as Minister of War, and he's promoted to Field Marshal. Upon retirement in 1924, he was given the honour of the title of Marshal of Italy. He died in Rome in 1928 and was buried in the church of Santa Maria degli Angeli e di Martini, next to Admiral Paolo van der Revel. There are very few ways to write all that, but it's a fun way to think about it. Why have I skipped through his career to the end and how he's ended? Well, because it's rather interesting. Both these are generals who, as popular or in terms of Diaz, is popular with the public. Let's be honest, Cadorna is popular with the elite. And these ships are being built in many ways to satisfy the need of various people, including the self declared Minister of Navy, to claim that it has the fastest, best cruisers, the fastest light cruisers. So, their naming of such recent ships after such recent generals must have a direct political consequence. Diaz, of course, is victory, which is popular with the public and nobility. Cadorna is popular with the elite and nobility, because by the time he was doing what he was doing, he was definitely one of them. And it's a sign of, in many ways, of the times and of the real fragility of the fascisti regime in Italy, that they are still having to make such compromises, that the people being put in charge as ministers, etc., are not from the party, and illustrates the fact that the party is, in many ways, not always even the senior partner in the alliance it has forged to get it the power to run the country. It might have the status of having a dictator and having the power, but in reality, it is actually always also in a bit of a weak position. These ships themselves, good ships, bad ships? Well, they're an evolution of them. They really are an evolution. And yes, this vessel is sunk. This vessel is sunk by a submarine getting a lucky hit. There aren't many light cruisers which would have survived getting hit by that sort of torpedo action. The thing is, whether they would have sunk quite so quickly is another matter. To me, I do wonder, especially with the designing of these ships, is whether the ones especially, were listed subdivision to make them that much lighter than their counterparts, because they're broadly speaking the same size. They are. There's slightly shallower draft, but that's neither here nor there really. At that level, it's not going to give you a difference of, depending on which one you're talking about, 40% to What, 30%? 30 to 40% of the 30% of the Gisiano class, 40% of the Cadorna class. Is it really going to give you that much of a difference? No. So yeah, light ships built to be very fast, very very fast. Would you want to be in combat in them? Nope. Are they a general purpose cruiser? No. Are they designed to operate within the ideas of what they thought in the 1930s they thought future conflict was going to be about? Yes. Do they have room for improvement? They could certainly have been improved. If you'd been prepared to sacrifice some of the speed, you could have improved the design tremendously. Oh well. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed. It's an interesting thing for me to think about where these names come from. To me, naming a ship for the Condottieri means something in terms of looking back at the heraldry and the imagery it creates. Naming them for modern generals, that is not about heraldry, that is not about imagery, that is about pure politics. That's not about reimagining the glories of time gone by. That's about shoring your position up with times now. It's rather sad in a way that it's the Cadorna which survives and the Diaz which gets. Let's be honest. You'd prefer not to lose either of them because of a huge loss of life. But if you're going to lose one, preferably with no lives lost, you'd prefer it to be the one named for the general who was absolutely not up to his job, rather than the one who was actually pretty good at it. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I hope you're looking forward to the live we have on Italian Cruiser Doctrine this week. That's going to be fun, especially if I've managed to write it with all the building work I'm doing on time. But I will do. It'll all be finished and prepped and recorded. So, yeah, it's going to be good. Hopefully this does better than the previous 3 recordings on the upload. So, if this uploads and works, say thank you, because it's lucky number 4. I need thank you to the gods of YouTube. That is not me. And the question, well, yeah, what do you think is the oddest name a prestige ship has ever been given? Because let's be honest, in the interwar period, cruisers are prestige ships. So what do you think is the oddest name that you could get that a prestige ship has ever been given? Really love to see comments telling me about that. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Why has that shrunk?